makeup?
Yeah, Brad Spatansky,
What's your major, Brad?
accounting and economics and finance.
Okay, thanks.
I'm Caitlin Schluter, and I'm a marketing and management major.
I'm Zach Fieber, and I am a management and marketing major as well.
Great.
My name's Yvonne Hilsman. My major, I have a dual major. One is in management and the other one is in math with an emphasis in finance actuary.
Great. Okay. Sorry for the little glitch.
Okay.
Looks like it's up.
Yep.
Okay, so thank you very much, Michael. Okay, so judges ready?
Ready.
You ready with this?
Ready to go?
You ready to click? Let us know when you want to start.
Okay.
We're ready.
All right, we'll go ahead and start now.
We are McKendree University. Our topic today is appearance-based discrimination in the workplace. We chose the topic because we thought it was interesting. We figured it applies to a lot of different people, and it's also a subjective issue. So there's not really a defined solution for it, but it is still an issue in most workplaces. Again, we are McKendree University. That's Yvonne, Zach, Caitlin, and I'm Brad. Zach's going to go ahead and outline our presentation now.
All right, thank you, Brad. We will begin our presentation by first defining our ethical issue, moving on then to some real-life examples of our issue. We will follow that with our case study that we chose to focus our research on, and then explain the impacts of that case from a legal, financial, and ethical standpoint. We will then give you a summary of our case, and then conclude our presentation with why, as HR professionals, this issue is important to you. As Brad stated, we chose this topic because of its subjectivity. Unlike an objective case, where the outcome is clear-cut, legal, illegal, our issue is situational and depends on the nature of the case. Subjective information is one person's opinions weighed against another person's opinions. An example of this subjectivity can be found in the statement, "Beauty is in the eye of the beholder," a statement we've all heard. This applies specifically to our case because one person's opinions or feelings about a person's looks, image, or dress can all be different depending on who you are. There are prior discriminatory laws that are set in place for things like race, age, gender, and religion. Our topic is unique in that it falls between these lines of these laws and is not protected typically. We do acknowledge that there are times where appearance-based hiring is necessary, such as a modeling agency, where appearance of the employee could directly affect how well that company does. We are specifically talking about cases where the appearance does not affect the performance of that job. We will now move on to a couple sample cases as well as a study to provide some background of how and where these type of cases are taking place. Our first case took place in 2005 in New Jersey at a Borgata Hotel Casino. One of the hotel's cocktail waitresses that were known as Borgata Babes suffered a thyroid condition and therefore went from a size 4 to a size 6. Upon request of a bigger uniform, she was told that Borgata Babes do not go up in size. Her contract specifically said she had to stay height and weight appropriate in an hourglass figure. But it was also noted that if one of the waitresses elected to have breast enhancement surgery, that the hotel would accommodate them with a paid medical leave as well as a bigger top. Our next case took place in California at a Jazzercise, which is a national fitness chain. A 240-pound woman who had been working there a long time was denied a franchise. And they said because their instructors had to be toned and physically fit. This woman actually worked out 6 days a week, taught back-to-back classes, and had no shortage of willing students. She was physically able to complete all the tasks they asked of her. And then we found one study that actually provided some actual numbers of that this type of discrimination is actually taking place out there. It was done in 1994 by Drs. Jeff Biddle and Daniel Hammermesh. They compared 3 surveys that were done by government agencies in their relative countries, 2 being from Canada, 1 in America, the United States. They were compared in this study there was a set of interviewees that were asked questions that regarded on their income, occupation, and background. Then they were also rated by their interviewers by their attractiveness. The rating started from homely, moved to below average, average, above average, all the way to handsome or beautiful. The results of this case showed that 9% of men that were found below average or homely actually received 9% less annually on average on their income. 32% of men that were found above average or handsome received 5% more on average on their income. The most attractive women received 4% more, and the least attractive women received 5% less. I will now hand it over to Caitlin, who will begin our discussion on our specific case study.
Thank you. As Zach has just illustrated, we found there is evidence of cases where the general belief of what appearance-based discrimination is, and that is that people who are deemed as unattractive or overweight are the ones who are mainly discriminated against. I'm going to introduce a case that shows the multi-levels of this issue, and that people who are also can be seen as too attractive, and they also can face discrimination in the workplace. In 2012, an Iowa state court upheld a dentist's decision to fire his assistant because he saw her as too attractive. Melissa Nelson, the dental assistant, worked for James Knight, the dentist, for 10 years, and she had seen him as more of a father figure, given that he was about 20 years older than she was. Their relationship had been, friendly. They were a close, personal, but professional relationship up until the last couple months of her employment, where Dr. Knight began to make comments regarding her appearance. He would comment about her clothing being too tight and too distracting, and he remarked that if his pants were bulging, it was a sign that her clothes were too revealing. Another comment he made, allegedly, was that towards her infrequent sex life, stating that that's like having a Lamborghini in the garage and never driving it. Most of these comments happened over text message between the two of them. They were most personal family issues that they would text about. Each one of them were married and had children, and so they did text back and forth, and that's where some of these comments were made. Knight's wife, who also worked in the dental office, she found these text messages, and that is when she requested that Melissa Nelson, the dental assistant, be terminated. Her and her husband viewed it as a threat to their marriage. They took it to their pastor to get counseling on it, to decide what to do about the situation, and they all agreed that the best decision was to fire Melissa Nelson because of her threat to his marriage and his undeniable attraction to her. When Knight brought Melissa Nelson into his office one day with his pastor in the room and told her, read straight from a paper telling her that she was being terminated, and he did outline the reason for this, that he was undeniably attracted to her. Melissa, obviously dumbfounded by this situation, didn't know what to do. She had looked at him as a father figure, as I had mentioned, and just didn't think anything of the comments up to this point because of their previous past relationship. She just kind of thought to let it go. She did decide to bring this case to court, and the judges, an all-male court, ruled 7-0 that it was the right decision by Knight to fire his employees because the employees had the right to fire if they find their employees irresistibly attractive, and it is not a discrimination case. Knight's attorney later said that the court made the right decision because it was upholding family values, and it was a victory for family values because his intentions to fire Nelson were based on preserving his marriage rather than because she was a woman. Now, to analyze the case a bit more in depth, I'm going to look at the behavior of Knight in comparison to Nelson, the assistant. So Knight's reason for terminating Nelson obviously was that she was too attractive. It was noted later that after terminating her, she spoke to her husband, saying that if he would have let her remain unemployed there, he might have been tempted to start an affair with her later in the future. The involvement of his family and wife, it could be seen as a conflict of interest that his wife is there and has so much say in the matters of who is hired and who works for her. But then on the other side, it is a family business, and it can be expected that she's going to have some say in the matter. The case in court, Knight won the case. Like I said, it was a 7-0 ruling, and his attorney, like I said, stated that it was the right decision for the court. Nelson's behavior at work. It had been noted that she had not been doing any inappropriate behavior, engaged in no flirtatious conduct. When he remarked about her clothing being too tight, she's a dental assistant. They wear scrubs, basic uniform that doesn't reveal too much. Also probably is not very tight. And all of her clients and customers they loved her as a dental assistant, and nobody ever saw anything wrong with her behavior at work. Her response to termination, she was obviously a little bewildered, dumbfounded at the situation, didn't understand what she could do, and so she filed a case. She appealed the first case. She didn't try to win a second one, but this court had the same ruling the second time around. And that goes into her case in court. She lost the case and was out of a job, and then the situation. And now Yvonne is going to go in to discuss the legal and financial implications of this case.
Thank you, Caitlin. Currently, there is only one state and 6 cities that have laws for appearance-based discrimination. The one state is Michigan. The one discrimination law that they have in place only regulates that an employer cannot fire an employee based off their height and weight. Since this law has been in effect in the 1970s, there has only been one appearance-based discrimination case each year since, so it has reduced. There are other laws that protect against discrimination, such as discrimination based off race, religion, gender, and sex, and these laws are ones such as the 14th Amendment and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In those cases, the cases are based objective issues where your age and your race can be easily determined, whereas appearance-based discrimination kind of lies in the gray area. Nelson filed her case because she thought she was appearance-based discrimination as a woman. However, Knight argued that he fired her to preserve her marriage. Under Iowa laws right now, currently, this is not illegal. Therefore, the Iowa Supreme State Court ruled that Knight had won the case. An interesting point, however, is that Iowa is an at-will state. This means that an employer can fire an employee for any reason or no reason at all. This being said, if Knight would have simply just stated that he just fired Nelson for no reason, there would have been no case at all. And if he would just said, I want to fire you, and that's the end of it, that he could have legally done that, and there would have been no reason to bring it to court. But some point that has not been brought up yet is that the text and the comments that Knight made to Nelson was like sexual harassment. And Nelson could have had a sexual harassment claim to Knight for sending the comments about her sex life and her appearance. And if Nelson would have filed this within 160 days of it happening, she could have possibly won. However, since she did not file it, we don't know that that would have been the exact outcome, but she would have had more of a chance of winning that case versus the one she filed of appearance-based discrimination. Now I'm going to move to the financial impact of this case. And whenever we looked at the financial impact, we analyzed all the stakeholders, which include Knight, Nelson, and the dentist business. Knight and Nelson, since they both went to court, had to face legal fees. They had to pay for them. And if Knight would not have fired Nelson, neither of them would have had to pay it. And then going on to the business, we have that they paid Nelson a 1-month severance pay after she was fired. If she was not fired, they would not have had to pay the 1-month severance fee. Also, we could not find any hard evidence of how the business was impacted financially, but we can concur that it was impacted negatively. This was a public case, and we can only assume that any future customers that know this information about Knight might feel uncomfortable about going to this dentist business, and if they could go to a different dentist office, they possibly would, because they know that what happened here. Moving on to Melissa Nelson, she was the most directly affected by this because she lost her job. Therefore, she had to rebudget her monthly expenditures because she only had the 1-month severance fee. She also had to take time now and look for a new job. Brad is now going to talk about the ethical viewpoints of this case and then finally conclude.
So, looking at this case from an ethical point of view, first we have to decide what parties are involved, which, like Yvonne said, is going to be Mr. Knight, his business, and Ms. Nelson. And then we have to look at the rights and responsibilities of each party. So for Mr. Knight, he has the right as a business owner to hire and fire whoever he wants to. And as Yvonne outlined, it is an at-will state, so he doesn't have to have a reason necessarily to fire anyone whenever he wants to. But at the same time, he does have the responsibility to treat everyone equally and fairly. This includes his employees, so he should have a reason to fire someone rather than just leaving them out to dry. Moving on to Ms. Nelson, she has the responsibility to act professionally in the workplace. As far as we can tell, she did a pretty good job of this, other than she probably could have limited herself to texting Mr. Knight and engaging herself in those conversations. She also has the right, again, to be treated fairly and equally as the rest of her coworkers. So for our conclusion, we kind of summarized the case, tried to explore a couple different options that Mr. Knight could have taken. He could have talked with Ms. Nelson and tried to minimize the issue at work while trying to work on his marriage at home. He could have done what he did, made the decisions that he did, which resulted in the consequences we've outlined. Or what we would actually recommend is, again, letting her go and not necessarily stating a reason to protect himself from lawsuits. Again, he doesn't really have to provide a reason, and he could have refrained from making remarks about her sex life and her appearance. Okay, so why is this important to you guys? As HR professionals, you may not have seen this in your company yet, but we want to raise awareness of it, realize that it is a problem and it is an avoidable problem. This case could have resulted in a sexual harassment case. A lot of other discriminations can result in lawsuits and settlements against your company. This not only hurts you financially, but it gives you the bad publicity, as Yvonne was saying. You can lose potential employees that don't want to work for you, making it harder for you to find the good talent. And it's also going to drive away possible customers that may be offended with how you handle the situation. So, thank you for your time, and that concludes our presentation.
Thank you very much. It's great that you could make this presentation to our Human Resource Society. We're going to take advantage of you being here to ask some questions. In your research, as you think about the responsibility of an organization to protect its employees, obviously we care about those that have HR professionals, but you're talking about a situation in which people are, a small business doesn't have that same opportunity. So from our perspective, in terms of how we look at our bosses and our employees, what top 3 things do you think we can do to create a more ethical work environment for employees that have to do with the very issues that you're raising? What would you recommend that HR professionals do to avoid this situation that you've described?
We've discussed a couple of things. One of them would be put in anti-bullying policies, where a person regulates how employees treat other employees, and that's regulated and enforced.
Another thing would be just to attend seminars like this, to have an HR professional maybe come into a workplace where you don't have an HR department and raise awareness of this issue and other issues, just to make sure people are aware of it and can adjust if they realize that they are engaging in these discriminations.
And I think the only other thing would be to ensure that you are treating all your employees equally. This would not have been a situation, per se, if his dental assistant would have been a man. Like, you just have to be sure that you are treating all of your employees equally and that they all have the same opportunity in their business.
Next question.
I did have one. So I'm identifying a couple of different scenarios in the cases that you proposed. Number one, we have the situation with the waitress where her physical appearance actually changed, and they had an agreement on the front end as to what it was supposed to be, right? And it changed, and she fell out of the contractual requirements. In the other situation, it sounds like Mr. Knight hired this employee based on her qualifications and maybe even her appearance. Who knows? I don't think we know exactly. Maybe he hired her because he found her attractive. But he then changed, right? So there's a change on his part. How do you reconcile the ethical implications of a law, and how would that implicate, this situation? How would it change the game? Real quick, let me clarify. When I say the law, if we were to be advocating as HR professionals in our various industry associations for a legal change, for there to add that to that list of criteria of sex, gender, religion as a protected class, if we were to add this, how would that actually impact those 2 different scenarios?
We kind of struggled with that right in our conclusion, because it's so subjective that everyone kind of views everyone else differently. So you can't really put a law into effect for a state or a federal level, but best you can do is have a company policy that everyone follows. Again, kind of falls back to our other 3 enforcement ways. But as far as making a law, you can't really have everyone abide by the same laws, because it's such an subjective topic.
We also discussed maybe if they did put a law in place, it would definitely have to be it would be one law, and it would be continuously changing and based on precedents. Like one case, and then there's another case that changed it a little bit more, and it would eventually have to evolve. It wouldn't be like a set law, and it's going to go in place this date, and this is how it's going to be the rest of till world's end. But it would definitely be changing for years to come.
And I think it's interesting, like you pointed out, that it was in the Melissa Nelson's case, she did not change as an employee, nothing changed, so she should be protected. I believe it would be easier to give protection to the employees who have not undergone any type of physical change in appearance. Like she was her work didn't change, excuse me, or her performance, her appearance, the way she interacted, it was on his side. So I think it's more that can provide some standards, for a law to be in place.
If you guys look at what Yvonne stated earlier in the presentation about that Michigan law, I'm not sure if we expanded on that, it actually includes weight along with the race, age, and things like that. So more or less, I believe we should be taking the stance that if they can physically perform their job, that they should not be relieved of their duty because of that.
What if the job, just to add on to that question, what if the job were to specify in the front end, like the waitress position? I mean, there were some specific criteria, she agreed to it, and then it changed on her own.
That specific case, like we said, we do acknowledge that there will be some cases like modeling agencies, clothing retailers that would have to probably change how they say it just to make sure they are protected. But in her case, we noted that if a waitress wanted to change herself physically, that they would accommodate for it. And because this was a thyroid condition, we believe that it should fall under it's a medical, if they're going to consider her breast enlargement a medical situation and accommodate, then a thyroid condition should also be considered a medical.
And that may be the line of delineation here, but because I'm thinking as HR professionals, we often encounter situations where an employee, let's consider a sales associate who interfaces with a customer, they come into the interview process and they're dressed like you all, very clean cut, and they're ready for the business situation, right? But they may show up for their first day of employment with several nose rings, and they get a neck tattoo and several other body modifications, and they're now client facing. How does this particular situation apply to those scenarios?
I think it's something that you have to know when a situation is out of the employee's control. Obviously, Melissa Nelson, she had no control over it. She's a woman. She has a womanly figure. Her clothes, excuse me, no matter how loose or how tight they were, is going to show that. There's nothing she can do to change it. Same with a thyroid condition. There's nothing she can do to deny the fact that her body is going to change or not going to change in another case. If certain situations like hairstyle, piercings, those can all be changed, and I think that is up to the employers. We all believe that is up to the employers' decision, what they want their employees to look like, if it's something that they can change, and it is part of their control. It is in their control, but if it's something out of their control, that is discrimination against, because there's really honestly nothing that they can do about it.
Rather than changing the law, do you think that there are things that we as HR professionals can do in terms of company policy that you would like to recommend?
That's what I didn't say, the anti-bullying law, or not law, it wouldn't be a law, it would be a regulation, policy, and an employee's handbook that they're given, and just to enforce it, especially very in the beginning, they could have presentations over it, just so that an employee is aware that it could be going on, because sometimes you do it, appearance-based discrimination without even knowing that you do it. And if the more aware you are of it, and it could, like, the more presentations maybe you hear over it, or say they want to take tests over it, or however they want to implement it, that'll put it in the employee's mind that, okay, this is an issue, I need to look out for it. For example, I'm a bank teller, and they give us, we take tests on a regular basis about red flags we need to look out for whenever transactions come in, and the more I see it, the more I know I need to look for it. So if they would have videos or tests, or maybe someone else has a better idea, it'll be more in their mind, it'll be more conscious and not just subconscious.
And then them themselves also know what to expect when beginning that job. If they get that job, then they are aware of what the dress code is, and it's not going to, and then just on the company's end, it just can't change over time. They just can't enact something that, they've been letting people go with having blue hair. They allow that, but then up to a certain point, they're just like, no, we don't allow that anymore, and you're fired because of it. So as long as it's upfront and in the beginning, and those policies and standards are clear-cut and set and visible to the employees, then I think that will reduce a lot of things, because then it is just acknowledged by all.
So you're talking
parties.
about work rules that more specifically identify what is important to the company in terms of the standards that they would like to apply. And how about ethical culture? Is there anything that you think the company can do in order to enhance a culture?
I believe that would start at just the hiring, training process to set a culture, an ethical culture such as that, which we actually talked about could be an ethical advantage to a company if this is becoming a known issue around, and your company is known as being ethically, morally more sound when it comes to the hiring, interviewing, training, even moving up in the company process. If it is known that you really do not discriminate on anything such as that you expressed when you hired them, then it could be an ethical advantage to any business.
Who do you think should be responsible for owning the ethical values at a company?
I believe it should start at the head of the company, and like we said with the culture, obviously it's passed down to the very bottom in the hiring process, training, things like that.
It's got to be set with the tone at the top. They've got to set the tone that everyone else follows. If the boss is going to use discrimination, then everyone below him is just going to follow along and not think too much of it. But as far as setting a tone at the top, if you do have the HR department, make sure they take everything seriously. Everything should fall into place as far as culture goes.
What do you think? Do you think there might have been some other stakeholders that could have been affected in the case study that you projected? For example, the community, they involved the church, they involved beyond just the immediate customers of the business. How about the municipality, the city, the small business association? Do you think there were any other people who might have been affected by the case?
I believe so. I believe business partners, if you had business partners who heard about the case. Obviously her family was greatly impacted by the situation. I think his family as well. It obviously put a strain on their marriage, whether it was he could have controlled it or not. And then just like you mentioned, customers, clients who were familiar. She had been there for 10 years, so people were familiar with her as their dental assistant, and they appreciated her and they loved seeing her every day. And so they're just confused. Other employees also, because they're kind of wondering, am I not fired? Am I not? Do you not think me of it as attractive? Like, because I'm still working here? It just kind of sets right. It just kind of it does change the morale a little bit in the workplace, definitely. And then just it's a reputation that'll just kind of evolve, and from rumors that spread from other things. So.
From your research and your collective perspective, having done a lot of work on this, one of the challenges for HR people is that you're really talking about personal responsibility. And it's hard to have laws about that,
right.
And it's hard to have even policies sometimes about that. So what advice do you give us in terms of, you talked about turning top bosses, obviously Mr. Knight dealt with personal responsibility in a particularly in a particularly unique sort of way. He brought in a third party. How would you recommend, beyond a bullying policy, that we have appearance-based discrimination clearer as an aspect of sexual harassment in ways that bosses can understand how personal relationships with a close employee can shift and change and hurt a company?
Soak that all.
Yeah.
I think, on Knight's end, it was more,
Because if I go back to my people and I say, appearance-based discrimination is really something we don't want to stand for here. And there have been cases of people who have gotten into trouble because they were uncomfortable by someone else's attractiveness. I don't want you to do that because it will hurt the company. I'm suspecting I won't get through because people probably don't really understand when something happens inside them to shift like that. But you're talking about a real morale changer and a real negative impact on an environment. And if it starts with bosses, what do you think, beyond policies, what do you think the culture can do to support that kind of respect, which I think is what you're talking about?
I think that a large thing we could do is just communication within everybody in the, whether it be an assistant, a boss, a lower level manager, anything, just being able to communicate to HR, communicate to their higher ups about how they feel around their employees. If they feel like an employee or a boss's morale and things like that is off, or I'm not sure how I want to put that, but wrong in a way. And if there's a system in place where they are comfortable to go to someone and kind of say this, then it will be a lot easier for people to know, hey, I really should not do this, because there's an environment here to where if I do it, it is wrong. It will be looked at as wrong. So that secretary has someone to go to, whether it be in that company or outside that company. Like she mentioned, maybe a small business union labor type of deal that she could go to, and it's very aware. That's why I believe we keep reiterating that we are spreading awareness, because it won't change if there's nowhere to go to.
I think it's important that Knight should have kept his personal opinions to himself, his comments to himself, and that's what was verged on the edge of sexual harassment. And if he had someone else to go, if he did bring it to his pastor, it's your personal decision, but we don't believe that he should have been in the meeting with Nelson, because that opened because it was discussed about third parties, and then she's aware of that, and I think that just creates a different dynamic than, it's not professional to bring your personal family-related issues into the workplace. If you're having those issues, that's okay, like that's going to happen, but I think you have to deal with them in a way that it's not going to spread across your business.
Well, and also, as Zach was saying, having someone else either outside of the company or someone inside the company to talk to, whereas if I know maybe that I have a coworker that's talking to me about how attracted he or she is to another coworker, and I feel like that shouldn't have been said, or there's just inappropriate things being said. If I went and talked to someone and notified someone this was going on, it could stop right there, instead of maybe this other coworker that has these feelings getting the courage up and confronting the one they think is attractive or have these strong feelings about them, getting the courage up to go talk to them, and then that awkwardness being there, and then it keeps growing and growing and growing. Whereas if I felt comfortable enough to go just say, hey, this is what's going on, and then it could have stopped right there between the two of us, instead of going on and affecting other people in the company as a whole.
So if we were to go back to our respective companies and propose that we implement a policy, or maybe make a modification to an existing anti-harassment type policy, how would you counsel us as we build that business case? Because it's not going to be as easy as snapping our fingers.
Yeah.
We're going to have to convince legal, and we're going to have to convince the HR organization, employee relations, and maybe even the investigative function, because this would be difficult to investigate. It's very subjective, and that term was used several times. So what kind of counsel and feedback would you give us as we go to do that?
Could you maybe restate that question a little differently? When you go back to your company, who specifically, when you're going and you're talking to your head managers, things like that?
As we build that business case to sell them on the idea that we need to implement a policy like this, how would you counsel us? What elements should be included in that business case as we go to propose a solution?
I think one of the main points is that just when it comes to any type of discrimination, we can lump it in that just different perspectives, different people. I mean, if you discriminate on any terms, you may miss out on that person that has that great idea, things like that. Just be open that it's an opportunity more than it is restricting them on what they cannot do. Just mainly be open, and you get different perspectives from different places, things like that.
And in addition to that, I think you really emphasize the threat of lawsuits if something does happen. I mean, appearance-based discrimination, as much as we're trying to raise an awareness, people know about it. People know that it happens, and it's more, especially within like our generation, I think, especially it's out there, and so people are not afraid to file against it. They're not afraid to claim that if something is close to that situation. So it's pretty likely, I think, that if somebody feels like they have been discriminated against in any way, that they will take that to court, and you will face, like we've discussed, legal fees. bad reputation.
And I also think if you're presenting this, trying to sell this to your company, you need to say, although this might not be the best thing to say, is that it's going to take time. You need to point out that this isn't going to happen and to snap of your finger as well. Because if you're selling this to your company, you could think they could also just think, okay, go ahead, do it, and then all of a sudden they see that it's not working exactly how it should. It's not working exactly how it is, and then them come back to you like, this isn't working, how come it's not working? And you just point out that it's going to take time, and you guys are going to have to work through the process of it and learn from it as well, because there's not many other companies to build this policy off of. So just inform their company that it's going to take time, and this is a learning experience not only for you guys as HR professionals, but as the company as well.
Now, although our 20 minutes are up, I just want to make sure that everybody got to ask the questions they wanted to ask before we go into feedback.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so let's set for 10 minutes. And now we're not in our role anymore. We're who we are. And so based on that, we're just going to we're going to give you feedback. The idea of that is that as you go into your 10-minute and your 90-second, hopefully we say some things that help you focus, particularly on doing the best job possible in those two. And then you can ask us at the end if you'd like, if you have any questions to ask of us, we'd be delighted to respond. Who would like to start?
I have a couple things off the top. So you were good, I think you were really good about setting up the law part about it, and we were trying to steer you into the policy discussion. So maybe it would be helpful for you to focus on the words risk and clear standards, because you had a couple of ideas about what kind of standards you might write into your policies. For example, no changing from the time that you were hired, clear standards about what we were expecting in terms of body appearance and professionalism. And I think talking a little bit about core values or the value of the company and respect. So it's not just in terms of raising awareness, which I thought was a very good statement, to talk about awareness and the time that it takes to raise awareness. But as a persuader, if you only have a really short time to talk about it, you got to hit on some resonating points. And I think that raising awareness beyond just the legal risks and the impact on the morale and the softer indirect effects that happen in an organization because of unethical behavior will probably get you farther faster.
Yeah, I would say getting the buy-in and getting everyone's ownership and accountability, and you touched on tone at the top, and you can have great tone at the top, but how do you get your lower level, bottom of the employee hierarchy to buy into that? And also when you're presenting to the company, how do you get, or whoever you're presenting to, how do you get their buy-in? How do you make it personalized to them? So just some food for thought, because if somebody doesn't feel a connection to something, it's all about human behavior and human interaction. And if you can feel that personal connection in some way, shape, or form, whether it's business related or they can identify with something, I think you have a better shot of, winning people over and having them go, yes, I want to do that, or I think that's a great idea.
Sure. So I jotted a few things down. I do think that you guys started off really well with the background. That was great to actually provide real cases and say, here are some things that happened, this is how it played out, these are the various elements, and then you grabbed one of them and you went with it. And that allowed us to kind of dive into the details and see the pros and cons, and actually kind of envelop in our minds what it would look like if we were to implement a policy like this, which is not easy. The other tough part of this is you conducted research on something that there's no firm solution for.
Right.
And that's why you're bringing it up then. We didn't expect a firm solution, but in a situation like this, it's good to propose, especially talking to HR professionals who are at a conference to learn something tangible they can go home and implement their companies, propose a variety of solutions and say, here's some things that we've thought about that may work. And it's extremely difficult, and you probably picked up on that from some of my questioning, it's extremely difficult to implement something new at a large corporation. And we're not coming from dentist office, we're coming from large organizations to this event to learn. If I were to be able to go back and say, hey, we have some things in place, maybe it's our anti-harassment policy, maybe it's our code of conduct, maybe it's our values, maybe it's some other employee guiding document out there that already exists, that if we made some minor modifications to, we could have a big win with us. So if you could maybe get your head around, some of those existing communication vehicles, maybe existing policies that we could maybe just modify a little bit, that would be something that I could take home and run with. But instead, I have a bunch of questions. I agree this is huge. How are we going to do this? Are we going to upset the legal department? Do we need to start influencing our legislature to make changes? The whole at-will employment thing, too. I personally come from California. We're an at-will employment state, yet we have some very strict sexual harassment protection laws. So how does that work? That's kind of the middle area there. And how, if you had some proposed solutions, those are things that we can take and go back and start to influence in our respective spheres.
You began with a provocative kind of question that I would like to suggest you consider. Well, it wasn't a provocative question. It was a kind of sort of provocative dilemma in terms of subjectivity and objectivity. I think you might want to consider adding on to that and not starting with something that continues ambiguity around an ambiguous subject. I think you want to say, because there is such opportunity for subjective interpretation, we want to help you effectively in your organizations consider, and building off both what the judges have said, we want to help you ensure that respect, core values, culture in your environment is a priority that will protect your reputation or whatever. So that the at-will is fascinating, but it leaves you with the fact that no matter what I do, this is still going to be a problem. And that is probably not the best, as was said, motivation for influencing people to take change. You have wonderful elements, but as you do the 10-minute, figure out how to do justice to the legal without raising more questions and making it seem like it's futile, because it's not, based on what you're talking about. And the bullying stuff is great, but I think that it really makes sense to look at this from the standpoint also of I love the dating. You were starting to get into, the more we ask, the more specifics were coming out that really should give employers cause for, this we thought, maybe 15 years ago, it got to be really a problem with sexual harassment suits in the workplace to put a focus from an HR standpoint on dating relationships, and that was a real kind of quandary, because you can't really legislate, as some companies try to, about whether people can date in certain areas. It's sorting itself out more or less in a lot of environments because people have been really clear up front. I think you need to be stronger about saying up front some of the things you said. All of you have said things that are really impactful, that deal with minimizing the vagueness of this problem. And I think the more you think about the gems that you already have, you can distill your 10 minutes into a very powerful call to action. And I think you have the ability to do that with what you have. It's a question of reframing it.
I wanted to add just a riff along what she was saying, because when you said, I'm a lawyer and I do have employment experience, you can say that it's at will and you should technically could be fired for no reason, but the laws also say that you cannot discriminate, right? So putting the two together,
Yes.
right next to each other, makes it seem less hopeless, because it made it sound like, well, you can do anything, so screw you, right? It's kind of, there's at will in principle, but, right, we also have laws that prevent sexual, gender, but other kinds of discrimination based on what I would call blind spots or unconscious bias. And as an organization focused on respect, you want to implement that with some practical solutions. So the idea of taking the vagueness of it and the subjectivity, which makes it a sexy challenge, and bringing it directly into, but here are some fixable solutions that are practical and easy for you to get done. And then people will feel more like, well, I can do that with breeze. I can put a policy in place that says, you know, texting about, having conversations or talking about body parts as part of work is not necessary. I mean, unless it's teeth.
And it's a really good issue
Yeah, it's
because
a great issue.
I don't think about appearance-based. I mean, yeah, you hear about, the big thing was flight attendants. If they gained weight, they lost their jobs, and then because that was discrimination, they didn't. So now you see flight attendants who are more than 26 years of age, tall, thin, whatever. So there is change possible when in fact you combine the legal with the, but you're really saying don't wait. I mean, you're essentially saying don't wait for the laws.
Right.
Because the money that will be spent to the risk and other standpoint is going to be detrimental to your company. And the culture piece probably could have been stronger in terms of impact. Here you only had, I mean, you went to great lengths about the story that you won't be able to go to in the 10 minutes. That was a demoral, I mean, I don't know how many people worked in that environment. What a toxic culture that was in that dentist's office. With people not controlling, you know, taking responsibility for themselves. We don't necessarily have that same kind of level because you're talking about a larger company. So think about that when you're, because you really are projecting, part of your persuasion is projecting to a, certainly it affects entrepreneurs and it affects small businesses, and but in a larger company, that's where the policy, the culture, and all of that. Yeah.
Well, while we're talking about that idea of don't wait, real quick, it may make sense to talk a little bit about some of the legal precedent. Like California, for instance, is a fairly progressive state, legally speaking, and like individuals who choose to have sex change, and all of a sudden they're not wearing a dress on Monday, they're wearing a suit, and they want to be called by a different name. How does that factor in? Because that's appearance-based, a lot of that. And we've confronted that from a policy perspective of large corporations. How do we deal with, you know, use of restroom? How do we deal with introducing them to customers that they now interface with a new name and a new gender? So, something to consider as we're talking about the law is still forming itself, right?
Yeah.
Take a look at the case law out there that's starting to shape the different states.
But respect never changes, no matter what the dynamic is, and that's what you have going for you as a solid. You're really talking about respect. Anything?
Very good, guys.
Great
Thank
job.
you very
One
much.
question I did have was, I know you said touch on how subjective it is. Are you mean like in the beginning of our presentation say that it is subjective, however there is a solution? Because that kind of had but is that where you kind of
Well,
got lost, whereas
You
there was
set us
gonna
up
be
in the
no-
beginning about objectivity versus subjectivity. And I think rather than leaving it out there, just floating,
Yeah.
I think you don't necessarily want to suggest you have a solution, but you have several suggestions
Okay.
for how to move from the nebulous into having really strong cultures. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Did we say anything that confused you, that didn't feel right? Please give us feedback about what was, you know, if anything wasn't helpful. Because the last thing we want to do, no matter how good your presentation was to leave you with confusion. Then we haven't done our jobs. So did anything not make sense?
No, I don't think it's confusion more than just points that we haven't been able to think that we haven't thought of, haven't crossed our mind, so we need to further investigate and stuff, which is definitely helpful.
Even if you don't further investigate, you have what came out in the Q&A is that you already have is stuff that you may want to replace some other
We kind
things.
of concluded with just our case instead of generalizing it to the whole issue.
Make it applicable to us.
Their conclusion can be stronger.
Yeah,
when you do
I
that.
can't emphasize that enough. It's not that you have any kind of research you have to do. You all said it. It was all in there. But you put other things in there that were distracting. And so, especially when you have less time, you have to pick out the nuggets that are going to hit those points right away. And then, so that way you'll be more persuasive.
And Jeremy's point, I think, can be interpreted another way too, which is to say you're really onto something, and there's more applications than you've thought about in terms of the sex change. So it doesn't mean you necessarily have to go into that because you may not be comfortable with that, but understand that there's a bigger picture here of the value of what you're talking about when you talk about, even if you only throw that out, you're talking about alerting professionals to understand the significance of appearance-based discrimination. And if it's not on the radar, these are the reasons why it needs to be, and this is what we suggest. You start, and I love the suggestion about building off of what companies already have. Because most companies are starting to do something with bullying. They
Yeah.
definitely have sexual harassment. What other kinds of things?
They have codes of conduct.
Yep.
They have work rules.
Blind reporting.
They have
retaliation.
they have compliance. They have ethics
Whistleblowing
reports,
helplines.
whistleblowing helplines, hotlines. And there's a lot of documentation in the structure of the organization where you can tweak it a little bit to say, put a marker in the sand that says, you know, our company stands for respect. We believe that there's a good business case for it. And this is what the behavior looked like. That behavior means, you talk a little bit about it in terms of allies and hot whistleblowing. So you can throw that in there. You don't have to go into a lot of detail about it, but you want to say that there are places in your organization that doesn't require an entire elaborate change, but that you can add to that will bolster an environment, a culture, ethical culture that would encourage people to take that more seriously.
Maybe giving examples when you talked a lot about training and awareness, giving real life examples that will be meaningful to an organization's employees so they can all understand it and be able to apply it and make ethical, sound decisions in what they do every day.
You did a really good job.
Thank you.
Thank you very
And
much.
I think that you will find in your 10-minute and your 90-second what you want to say that's the most impactful. Because, as was said, you really want to influence people.
Right.
And you have the ability to do that. We need to fill out our forms, and the next somebody else coming in at 11. But I just wanted to thank you all.
Yeah, thank you for
Thank you.
Absolutely. And
for the
if
opportunity.
if you see any of us around today and want to ask any other questions, don't hesitate.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Nice to meet you. Thank you. Good job. Thank you.